we're going to be doing a lot of focus on the storyline of chapter 2, Perek Bet. We have one person still in the joining mode. Okay. And there's sometimes that technology thing that ties someone's access. Anyway, we'll get started. And let's do that. As I said, there's a lot of material I'd like to cover. Let's get those names down for now. Okay. And give you a little more privacy. All right. We're chapter 2. Let's just get that off the screen. 3 more people. Let's bring everybody in. Admit. Okay. Good. Where we left off was learning about how biblical poetry is written, and we gave some examples. And of course, there's the transition to new leadership now. But it's going to be more complicated than it initially may have appeared. And chapter 2 becomes just it's birth pangs of a new way, and of a new government, and of a new population. Well, let's see what I'm talking about right away. Vayehi acharei chen, and it was after Saul had died in battle. The Amalekite messenger came. David had that fellow executed. David wrote a dirge, or a kina, a song of wailing about the death of his beloved friend Jonathan and King Saul. And now what? And now what? So it was after that. Vayashal David B'Hashem. And I want to remind you, I'm not going to take out all that time today with the Talmud, because today's class, I really want to move forward a little bit with the storyline, the narrative. But I want to remind you that we've been learning that it was part and parcel of being the king of Israel to consult God. Nowadays, I mean, politicians talk about God, and televangelists talk about they pray to God. But that's the world of today. And different people are more sincere, less sincere. And I'm not interested in really exploring what's motivating each person. But it's considered to be good politics to talk about God outside of communism. So, like Machiavelli wrote that. And when I was in college, we had to read Machiavelli in the introductory political science course, read about 15 books. And we read The Prince by Machiavelli. And he kind of advises how to be a good political leader. That's really what the book is. When people talk about, oh, this is Machiavellian, he's basically an Italian guy, which you could tell his name ended in I. So unless the vowel that ends your name is O, like Shapiro, okay, you're probably Italian. And so Machiavelli wrote a book of political brilliance on how to be an effective leader. And people call it Machiavellian, like it's all manipulative, because that's what politics is. That's what it is. You're trying to manipulate people to vote for you. Maybe they don't want to vote for you. Well, you can't, if you're going to sit around like some kind of a philosopher, well, maybe they don't want to vote for me. Maybe it's not ethical to ask people to vote for me if I'm not really the best thing for them. And then you're wrong business. Your job is to ask people to vote for you. And then after your term of office is over, if you did not end up in prison, so you write your memoirs, and then you look back. But other than that, so Machiavelli explained that it's a very important part of being a political leader to profess a belief in God. And obviously different societies, this one's Jewish, this one's Catholic, this one's Muslim, but people want to know that their leader has humility and believes in God, that there's someone more than just themselves. People want to feel that. It's good politics. But with the kings of Israel, it's a lot more than politics, and we've been learning that. We've been learning, like Thursday in Rambam class, that the king of Israel had to write his own Sefer Torah. You actually had to write a Torah scroll, not your own Torah like your own Judaism. You had to handwrite a Torah scroll from an official, pre-approved, certified, accurate version. In fact, the king wrote two Torahs. One he always kept back at the palace, and one he always brought with him whenever he traveled anywhere, to war, to battle, wherever he went. He was always to a political meeting. He always was accompanied by his Torah. And that was something the nation knew, even when they had some kings that were not the best of kings, but they all were accompanied by the Torah. And they professed a belief in God. And we even Thursday night last week were talking about King Yanai, who apparently was quite a strong personality. When he presented himself to the Sanhedrin, he was subpoenaed, and they told him to stand up. And he said, when all of you rabbis on the court tell me to stand up, that's when I'll stand up. I'm not standing up just for one rabbi telling me. And then the rabbi who told him to stand up looked at everybody else on the court, the other 70 rabbis. There was a 71 judge court, because it was a capital case for someone else. And nobody else would dare tell the king to stand up. They were terrified of him. And even he had a Torah with him wherever he went. It was understood. Imagine whether it's Biden or some other president of the United States or some other visitor. Imagine wherever Biden would go, he goes to meet with the leader of France or the leader of England or the leader of this, or he goes to Israel or wherever he goes. Imagine the equivalent of he comes with his, frankly, if he came with his family Bible, it would be a story they'd write in the papers about how the president never goes anywhere without his family Bible. Imagine the message that sends. So that's the king of Israel. We have also learned in that same context that the king always consulted with God. Now, how do you consult with God? So, I've surfed the TV stations over the years, and I've watched 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there of these televangelists like a Jimmy Swaggart. I wouldn't say that's how I devoted my Sunday nights, but I'd be going through okay, who's this guy? What is this guy? I'd watch 5 minutes, and he would always talk about how God talked to him. He asked God a question, God answered him, and he had conversation. All right, look, I don't want to get into that, but that's like one way of what I've seen on some of the TV stations. So, but with the kings of Israel in the Bible, they really did communicate with God. Now, they weren't all prophets, Nevi'im, so they did not necessarily have prophecy, but they always had a prophet, a Navi in their generation who advised them, or who was sent by God to criticize them and call them to the carpet, call them to the rug. I don't know. And so Denise's, I always have these malapropisms, and unlike Biden, I can't. I'm just. As soon as I stop having malapropisms, that's when you have to look into my back. That's how you have to look into me. So I don't know. They call them to the rug. Anyway, maybe just stick with wooden floor. So the king would consult with God. How did he do it? Either he consulted with the Navi. Who was the Navi at the time of King Saul? Samuel. We've been learning that. Samuel died. Saul no longer had anybody of prophetic power to consult. But at least you could consult with the Kohen who would do the Urim and Tumim. But of course, we learned already, so we won't go into it again, how King Saul no longer could consult with the Urim and Tumim. But that's what you would do. So if you did not have an accessible or readily available prophet to ask a question of God, you would go to the Kohen Gadol, the high Kohen, and he would consult on your behalf the Urim and Tumim. And we have learned in the Talmud how that was done. He would ask yes/no questions, not long questions calling for long narrative responses. He would ask questions like, shall I go into battle? Will I win? Simple yes/no type questions. Perhaps God might elaborate with a second sentence, but the question would be that way. And only certain people could ask the question. Only the king of Israel, or the high Kohen, or someone actively involved in the needs of the community. So that David, was not yet king. Saul was king, and he was no Kohen, because Kohen is the tribe of Levite, and David's the tribe of Yehudah, Judah. But he was deeply engaged in fighting on behalf of the Jewish people. So he was allowed to ask of his Kohen, who was available to him because the Kohanim still alive had fled from Saul. And so David had access to the Urim and Tumim. So it is telling right away now, as we get into the text, I'm not even going to pull out Gemaras for this, just refreshing your own memories, as you've been with us for 40 previous classes of the first Samuel, Shmuel Aleph, that the king begins his new career not by kissing babies, not by eating whatever you eat at an Iowa State Fair. The king begins his career by consulting with God. And he wants to know, what should he do? Ask yourself a moment. You're the new king of Israel. What's the first thing on your mind? What, are you going to have for lunch? I mean, what's the first thing that goes to your mind? He's got a very practical first question. Where do I sit? Where am I going to, where's my palace? Where's my capital? Saul has been bound with his family traditions and where his family came from. And Shmuel Hanavi, the prophet Samuel, was, of course, based in the area of Ramah. Where's David going to be? Well, a simple answer would be, well, I guess you'd be in the tribe of Judah. After all, you are a descendant of the tribe, reminding you, your tribe is based on your father. Your religion is based on your mother. If your mother's not Jewish, then you're not Jewish, even if your father is a Cohen. But if your mother is Jewish, then you're Jewish. And if you have a father who's not Jewish, then you have no tribe. But you are Jewish. And nowadays, that's not much of an issue. In biblical times, it was a huge issue. Because if your dad was converted to Judaism, having married a Jewish mom, or if both your parents had converted, so you're Jewish, but if you're not able to trace your tribe because your father doesn't have a tribe, then everybody lived on land that had been allocated tribe by tribe when Yehoshua brought the Jews into Israel. So what tribe does your father have? None. What land did he get? None. Which is why the Torah is so overly, again and again and again, adamant that we have to be especially thoughtful and kind for the stranger and the Levi and the widow, because these people have no land. The widow's husband has died. So who gets her husband's land? She had moved on to that land because there was part of his tribal family inheritance. Now that he died, it doesn't suddenly go to her. The land remains with the tribe, the Shevet. So what, you're going to take it away from him? No, you give it to his sons. So what happens to the mother? Well, if she's been good to her boys growing up, everything's going to be fine, hopefully. But it's a serious thing. It's nothing to joke about. And it was a familial society. It was a tribal society and a familial society. Familial in the sense that people did not do like they do now in the United States. In the United States, you raise a kid in Irvine, and you raise a couple of kids, and this one moves to Colorado, this one moves to Florida, this one moves to Dallas, this one moves to Washington, D.C., this one moves upstate California, and everybody, comes Thanksgiving or Pesach or Rosh Hashanah, and everybody's flying everywhere else. That's not what it was then. You lived on the land of your inheritance, of your tribal heritage. So the simple thing is that David's going to live as a son of Yishai, Jesse, from the family line of Judah, Yehudah, tracing back biblically to one of the 12 sons of Jacob, namely his son Yehudah. So when Joshua allocated land, we're going to look at the map in a moment. Yehudah was given land. David will be there, but Yehudah's like, I don't know. I live in California. I'll say California. So California has Los Angeles, they have San Francisco, they have San Diego, they have Bakersfield, yay for Merle Haggard. So there are a lot of different cities. Where is he going to sit as king of Israel? Well, in Judah, Well, for that matter, come to think of it, like no joking and not getting into the politics of individual presidents, but and keeping Trump and Biden and Obama and all of that stuff out of it. But nobody would imagine Biden becomes president, we're going to move the White House to Delaware, or we're going to find a new White House in Delaware. Obama, we're going to find let's say Illinois. Trump, well, for his first term, New York. If he gets another term, maybe Florida. I mean, it's chaos. The capital is Washington, D.C. All right, in the very beginning, it was New York very briefly. Then it moved to Philadelphia, and then there was the yellow fever. And when the yellow fever started killing everybody in Philadelphia left and right, that's when they decided to move out of Philadelphia. And that's when the powerful families of Virginia, the FFVs, the first families of Virginia, who ran the country, you had Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, George Washington. So all the early presidents, except for the two Adamses, were from Virginia. So they decided, we'll make the capital. Why do we have to schlep to New York and Philadelphia? Let's make the capital in Virginia. So they moved it over to Virginia. And then they called it Washington, D.C. They carved it out of Virginia on the border with Maryland. So that's the background that we're facing now with King David. Does he go, where was Saul? Saul was in the tribe of Benjamin. Of course he was. So does David now move to Benjamin the way Obama moved to Washington, D.C., and Biden moved to Washington, and Trump moved to Washington, D.C., and John Kennedy moved to Washington, D.C.? I mean, and the Bushes moved to Washington. I mean, is that how it goes? Or does he move the whole thing to where he comes from? So that's the background. Let's also take, as we go more into the text, let's also take a look at the maps. Always got to go to the map. Okay, so let's take a look at the map. Get rid of that. Here we go. Let's look at some maps. We already know this map from a long time ago. And that's when he was in the Gaza Strip, based with the Philistines. He was based in Tziklag, and the king of Achish of the Philistines was based in Gath. Then came the war at Mount Gilboa, that we just learned at the end of the Battle of Gilboa, at the end of 1 Samuel, with the death of Shaul, King Saul. There was Ein Dor, not Endor, but Ein Dor. That's where where King Saul encountered that woman who sought to raise up the spirit of Samuel. And then they had the battle. It's the Jordan River, Dead Sea. Okay. And now that we have all of that, let's keep looking at maps, so we have a further understanding of what we're looking at now. Now, this is the overview, but that's not what I want to do much. I just want to give you the big picture. So there's the Gaza Strip. In those days, the Philistines, which is why Rome renamed the land of Israel Palestine, because the Romans kicked out the Jews 2,000 years ago and wanted to sever all historic memory and relationship of Jews with Israel. So instead of calling it Israel, which is an awfully Jewish name, or Yehudah, because Judah is King James taking the Hebrew word Yehudah, and instead of spelling it out Yehudah, Yehudah, they King James it into Judah, but it's Yehudah. And that's Jew. Jews, like I'm a Jew. In Hebrew, I'm a Yehudi. I'm of Judah. Why are Jews called Judans or Judeans? Because after the Assyrians, the Assyrian Empire up there, Ashur, not to be confused with Syria, which in biblical times was Aram, had Damascus, as any Syria would. Assyria is outside Ashur. After they exiled the 10 tribes of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, and Samaria, and they became the 10 lost tribes, so who's left? Only the 3 tribes of Judah, really, really small tribe of Benjamin, and Levi, because they were based at the Temple Mount, working as Kohen and Levi. And as among those three tribes, Judah made up like 90% of all the Jews. So we all became known. Yeah, maybe technically you're a Binyamin, you're a Benjaminite or a Levite, but odds are 9 to 1, you're a Jew, you're a Yehudi. So the Romans, they decided we don't want to call this place, now that we're driving out the Jew, we don't want to call it Israel. We don't want to call it Judah. What are you going to call it? Brooklyn? No, that's too Jewish also. So who lived here before the Jews? The Philistines. So that's what we'll call it. Plishtim. They were the Plishtim. So we'll call it Palestine. And that's how it got that name. So you've got Gaza. There has not yet been the division of the country. It's one big country, although we're going to quickly see the division starts, right? 2 Jews, 3 opinions right away. Right away it starts. But this was the overall picture of the country, just no dividing line yet. And our boundary, our neighbors, never have been really blessed with the nicest of neighbors. We don't get to have like Canada, okay? Like Canada is a good neighbor. We don't get Canada in Israel. America gets Canada, so at least we, the Americans, get Canada. Actually, when you think of what Israel's got, Mexico is pretty good also for a neighbor. So you had Aram, which is Syria, Ammon, which is biblical, as is Moab. I've mentioned that Ammon and Moab, modern-day Jordan, capital of Jordan is Amman. That's where it comes from. Edom, they descended from Esav, the brother of Yaakov. Ammon and Moab were the 2 children born to Lot when he was in the cave with his 2 daughters right after Sodom and Gomorrah. These Arabu tribes included Amalek, all right? And so let's keep looking a little bit more. So we have 12 tribes. Here again is the Jordan. It's not easy to find the perfect map for the class, and I do my best. I look for colors. I look for things that'll make it easiest for you, whatever particular platform you're using. But, you know, I try to find large typeface, the best I can do. So here's the Jordan River here. Again, it's always in the middle of the land of Israel. Today, the impression is that the Jordan River is on the east of Israel, and then there's the so-called West Bank that the Arabs call Palestine, or the Palestine Authority. Actually, Jordan River is right in the middle of Israel. There is no West Bank. There's this part of Israel, and there's this part of Israel. And if you're going to say, well, it's the West Bank, so then that's the East Bank. So that also belongs to the Jews. And if you've ever actually been here, to be a bank, that's like when you go to the beach, you see the bank of the river or the ocean. But when you're up and down Judea, Samaria, you don't see water, you don't see the Jordan River, unless you happen to be driving right along the river. Okay, so here are the tribes. And again, there are 13 tribes. We talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, remembering that Yosef, one of the 12, was divided into 2, Manasseh and Ephraim. So Yosef has a big portion, because they were broken into 2 tribes. Yaakov had said that on his deathbed, and before, when he had said that he deems his 2 grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh, will be to me like, for example, like Reuven and Shimon. He said he's got all his sons around the deathbed, and he takes those 2 grandsons, you will be to me, Ephraim and Manasseh, like Reuven and Shimon, from which we learn out they will have equal tribal status. And unique among Manasseh among all of them is that Manasseh is located on both sides of the Jordan River. You've got Manasseh here, and you've got Manasseh here, along with 2 other of the 13 tribes that were on the east of the Jordan, Reuven and Gad. Reuven, Gad, and partial Manasseh. And there's the rest of Manasseh. And why is Manasseh spelled Manasseh? For the same reason, whatever King James's rules were. And in fact, the first battles of the Civil War in the United States, the Battle of Manassas in Maryland, was named for Manasseh. So anyway, this is the land, and this little piece of land is Benjamin. I'm going to call it pink, partly because it is. And not to be mixed up with this more of a, I don't know, coral. Let's call it coral, is Dan or Don, but there's also Don up here. Don is the northernmost part of tribal Israel in biblical times. It's often spoken about Mini Don va'ad Beersheva, that the land extended from Dan up north to Beersheva all the way in the Negev. And then there's a little piece of Dan over here, right near the Philistines. Samson was the tribe of Dan, and Samson spent most of his time dealing with the Philistines, the whole story. And right near is Benjamin. So let's take a look at how that all shook out. Well, who is Benjamin? Benjamin is the son, the original Benjamin is the son of Rachel, Rachel. She had two boys. Remember, she had trouble giving birth. So first you had Leah giving birth to Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehudah. And then Rachel, so that was Reuven, Shimon, Levi is in Jerusalem, and Yehudah. And then you had Rachel, having had trouble giving birth, gave over her handmaid Bilhah, who gave birth to Dan and Naphtali. And then when Leah saw that Rachel had given over her handmaiden and brought two tribes to the nation, Dan and Naphtali, so Leah gave over Zilpah, and she gave birth to Gad and to Asher. And there, and again, there's your Dan Naphtali. So you see how the children of the maidservants are on the outskirts. See that? They're mostly on the outskirts. And also an interesting historical anomaly, or maybe it's not an anomaly, but purposeful. The three tribes that ended up east of the Jordan, least well defended, because everyone else is on the other side of the Jordan able to stand up with each other. These are really exposed to those countries we were just looking at. They're exposed to Aram and Ammon and Moab and all these. So what they have in common is they're all firstborn. Reuven is the firstborn of Leah, and Gad is the firstborn of Zilpah, and Manasseh is the firstborn. If you remember, Joseph had married Osnat, and she gave birth to Manasseh and Ephraim. And then, of course, there was a story about how Yaakov changed the hands when he gave the deathbed blessings, and he put Ephraim first, but Manasseh was the firstborn. So being firstborn, you were made out of the right stuff, as they used to say in the NASA program, that there's something about being a firstborn, a little bit more ready to go venture out and have that mindset. So Benjamin was the least of tribes. Look at the size. That's what I was talking about earlier tonight. How when all that was left of us was Yehudah, Benjamin, and some Levi, well, that's what I'm talking about when I say that Judah made up 90% of the Jews. That everybody else is 10 lost tribes. Just take a look at the map. Colors don't lie. And that's the comparative size. So Saul was Benjamin. So he was king in Benjamin. And it happens to be that Yerushalayim is just on the Benjamin side of the border of Binyamin and Yehudah. So we always talk about Jerusalem being in Judea. Well, that's if you're speaking about Israel in terms of Judea and Samaria. If you're talking about Israel, well, there's the kingdom of Judea, Yehudah, and the kingdom of Samaria of Israel. So in that context, Jerusalem is part of Judah. But actually, the kingdom of Judah included Benjamin. And so it's tucked up there. Just as like Washington, D.C., I guess, is tucked probably just in Virginia, just inside Maryland, maybe the other way around. I think it's Virginia, because those are the guys who made the decision. So Yerushalayim is just inside Binyamin, but it's right near Judah. And now David is the king. And does he move to Binyamin the way that Biden moves to D.C., as does Obama, as does Trump, yada, yada, yada? Or does he move the capital to his neck of the woods? And no one's really ever tried to find out what's the rule. So he's going to find out the rule. Let's find out. He asks of God. How does he ask God? He doesn't talk to God that way. He goes to the Kohen. And the Kohen pulls out the Urim and Tumim. And that's how he can ask. And you ask a yes-no question. David inquired of the Lord, Vayishal David B'Hashem, ha'eleh ba'achat arei Yehudah. I mean, should I, the unspoken half of the question, because you're not supposed to ask a compound question, what we refer to when taking depositions in litigation, supposed to ask one question at a time. The unspoken question, should the capital remain in Benjamin? But he doesn't ask it that way. Should I move to one of the cities of Judah, of Yehudah? Let me say towns, because it's bad translation. The word ir, array, it's cities. Should I move to one of the, eleh, by the way, eleh. Oleh is to go up, right? You make aliyah, you're moving from the United States, France, Russia, South Africa, you're moving up to Israel. It is regarded as a spiritual elevation, no matter where you're moving topographically. Even if you're moving from a mountain to the Emek of Jezreel, Emek Yisrael, the valley of Jezreel, it's called Aliyah because you're moving up to Israel. So shall I move up spiritually into one of the cities of Yehudah, Judea? And it's a yes-no question. And this is normally the way it's done with the Urim and Tumim. You get a one-word answer, either yes or no, or a one-word equivalent. Shall I go up? God says, alay, which in Hebrew is one word. In English, it's two words. Go up. So go up where? Well, the question was, should I go up to one of the cities? If he said, should I go up to Jerusalem? And then he was told, go up, that would mean you should go to Jerusalem, but he didn't ask it. He asked a more general question, should I go up to one of the cities of Judah? God said, go up. Vayomer David, all right, David gets more specific. Ana eleh, where should I go up? So that's not a yes-no question. Why not? Be practical. And he's being practical, and he understands that the proper procedure for asking a question of God is based on practicality. What's he going to start doing? Game of 20 questions now. All right. Should I go up to Judah? Yeah. All right. Should I go up to Jerusalem? No. All right. Should I go up to Bethlehem? No. Should I go up to, and this can go on for like 2-3 weeks. So he finally says, where? Where should I go up to? And he does not have a preconceived notion, by the way, that it should be Jerusalem, because guess what? Jerusalem is not yet Jerusalem. There's not yet a Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem. Where's the Beit HaMikdash? There is no Beit HaMikdash. The Jews came in with the portable sanctuary we learned in last week's Torah portion, the Mishkan, the sanctuary, and it parked itself, the people brought it and parked it in Shiloh, in Samaria, the northern, what would eventually be the northern kingdom, but then was just, that's where it was. The holy city of Shiloh. And that's where Eli the Kohen was, and that's where Shmuel began his reign as the prophet and everything. So the religious capital of the country was Shiloh, up north. And then Shmuel had kind of moved a lot of the religiosity also to Ramah, because that's where he was based. And so where the holiest man in the country lives, by nature becomes a very holy place. And all right, so where should he go? Well, guess what? Not Jerusalem. Vayomer David ana eleh. Where should I go? Up. Vayomer, God answers one word, Chevrona. To say to Chevron technically is El Chevron. El means two, T-O. But it's an Hebrew anomaly or a poetic kind of literary thing that if a location is the last word of a sentence, you can turn it into a sort of prepositional contraction by adding a kamatz hey to the city. Yerushalima would be to Jerusalem, and Chevrona is to Hebron. So God says, go to Hebron. And It's interesting, by the way, whenever I write it in English, I hate to write Hebron because I really am a big stickler as much as possible to write Hebrew names when writing in English true to the Hebrew name. So if the name is Yaakov, I like to write it out in English as Yaakov, not Jacob. And Hebron is technically Chevron, but it reads like the gas station, the gas company, Chevron. And so then I would write Hebron, and I mentioned it to a friend, and he mentioned that what he does is he writes Hebron. So they don't mix it up with Chevron, but they also don't think he's taking the King James spelling. Hevron, and there's even a literary device among academic scholars of the antiquities where they write the letter H with a little dot underneath it, and that conveys the guttural sound of ch. Okay. So David is told, go to Hebron. Vaya'al Sham David. David went up there. He went up there from where? Where did he go from? You remember? Of course you do. He went from Tziklag. He's in Tziklag. We've seen the map for chapters upon chapters. So now he's going to go up from Tziklag to Hebron, which is a little bit south of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is not yet the Jerusalem you think of nowadays, because we were talking about Mount Gilboa and Saul was in Binyamin. Okay, fine. And so he's going to go up to, on this map, they're giving you the capitals of each country. Jerusalem was that capital, Shomron, Samaria was that capital. And that's why I prepared more maps. And so here's Jerusalem, just in Binyamin, and here's Hebron, in the heart of Judah, which makes a lot of sense because they didn't have trains and buses and cars. Yeah, they could get around. They had wagons and stuff and camels, and they did get to war. I mean, they managed to get whole armies, but realistically, to have the best ability in a time of no automobiles and such transportation, to be able to get around as often as possible, as broadly as possible, at least in your own region, it made sense to be based in the center, geographic center of the region, rather than on the northern tip. That was actually part of the thinking as well, is why the first families of Virginia created Washington, D.C. as the capital. They said, now that things are shaking out, Philadelphia and New York are too far to the East Coast. It's too inconvenient. All of the power brokers in this country are in Virginia. I mentioned Washington and Jefferson, Madison, Monroe. Madison was into Montpelier, the plantation, and of course, Washington was at Mount Vernon, and Jefferson was at Monticello, and so they moved it over to Virginia. So Hebron made sense, but it wasn't his call. This is part of what made him great. What I ended last class with. The greatness of David from the beginning was his humility, his understanding. He's not the boss. God is the boss. So here's another map, and you'll see why in a moment. And there's Hebron again. This map puts Jerusalem. No. You might think for a moment, wait, it's putting it in Judea. It's putting it in the country of Judah. But remember, Benjamin really, and we're going to find out more about it in a moment. You'll see what this map is about. So Jerusalem again is on that boundary, technically just tucked inside tribal Benjamin, whereas Hebron is in the middle of Yehudah. And by now, Tziklag, you may recall, we learned that Tziklag changed basically nationality from being Philistine in the Gaza Strip, where you have that other cities we've been looking like Aphek and Gath. Goliath was from Gath. But Tziklag, because David ended up with his 600 men based in Tziklag, he essentially separated it. It became effectively a separate political entity from the rest of the country, and it was too complicated for the Philistines to take it back as long as David had power. And how he's not just a guy, he's the king of Israel. So you've got that going on. Let's go back. Okay, and he goes with his two wives, Achinoam and Avigail, Eshet Naval. Just refresh our memories really quickly on this one. We learned in 1 Samuel chapter 25. Do you remember David was going through the Carmel? David's servants came to Abigail at the Carmel. And what had happened was at first, he and his men were hungry, and he found out there's this incredibly wealthy guy named Naval. And Naval was a very rude, boorish man, would not give anything. So his wife was afraid David was going to just have her husband killed, etc., and would take all the stuff without even waiting for permission. And so she arranged to send food and wine and all kinds of supplies and clothes. Then when she later told her husband that she had saved his life by giving David food supplies, her husband had a stroke. He was that much of a misanthrope and just a miskite. And he didn't want to give anything away of his own at all, even though he was extraordinarily wealthy. And he died of a stroke. And then David married her. And she came and she just wanted to save everybody's life. And Abigail rose quickly, mounted a donkey, and with 5 of her maids in attendance, she followed David's messengers. She became his wife. He basically sent messengers to propose marriage to Abigail, and she came along. Okay. And then if you recall, we finished chapter 25, that after marrying Abigail, he also married one more lady, Achinoam, while King Saul, in order to make David crazy and add the psychological warfare to the military warfare, took away David's wife, Michal. Saul's daughter, Michal, gave her to a guy named Palti Ben Laish, and that's a whole nother story. I don't want to get back in there now. We talked about it in the past, and believe it or not, it's going to come up again in a few classes. So that was Abigail. And then David took Achinoam of Jezreel. So these people have been in the story. You may have forgotten about them, but they've been there in the story. It's a well-written story. All the characters already have been put in place and haven't yet had their moment to come out in the story, but they're there. They've been there. And Shaul had given his daughter Michal, the wife of David, Lafalti ben Laish. Okay. And then there was that. And the other player that's important for you to refresh your memory in chapter 26, which of course was the following class, was when the wars were continuing between Saul trying to kill David and David fleeing for his life, and learning that Saul and his men were encamped at the mountaintop across a hilltop where David was, a valley between them. And in the middle of the night, David went with Yoav, Y-O-A-V, Yud Vav Aleph Bet, his commander-in-chief, his chief of staff, Yoav ben Tzruya, his general, and he went with Yoav, and they tiptoed into the encampment of King Saul. And you may remember Saul was sleeping. The entire encampment was sleeping. And David still harbored regrets for having cut Saul's garment, his royal robe, in a previous encounter. You'll remember that situation in the cave when Saul had gone to relieve himself, and David cut a piece of the robe and sort of never forgave himself for having dishonored the royal robe, but wanted to be able to provide evidence to Saul later that I could have killed you. And it had occurred to him at that moment, what better way to prove how he had been within striking distance. And this time he didn't do that. If you remember, what he did instead was he took Saul's spear. He saw the spot where Saul and his army commander, Avner, son of Ner. That's why I'm doing this now. I want to refresh your memory on this guy. Great tzaddik, very righteous man. So I shouldn't really call him a guy. He was a very righteous man. Avner ben Ner Sar Tzva'o. Avner, King James calls him Abner, the son of Ner, and he's the Sar Tzava. He's the commander-in-chief of Saul's armies. Yoav is the commander-in-chief of David's 600 men. All right. Well, Avner is supposed to be guarding Saul. And he's asleep. They're all asleep. It's the middle of the night, and they're on a deserted hilltop, and they're all asleep. And then David, he goes there with Avishai, the son of Tzruya, namely the brother of Achinoam, the brother of Yoav, and he takes that spear, brings it back to where he's at. David and Avishai approached the troops by night, found Saul fast asleep, his spear stuck in the ground at his head, Avner and the troops sleeping around him. Avishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Let's kill him. Single thrust of the spear, end of story. Won't have to strike twice. David, absolutely not. We know this by now. Don't you dare do him violence. You may not, he's Mashiach Hashem, you may not lay your hand on the anointed of God, even if he's trying to kill me. We're going to have to figure this thing out, but we can't do that. And so David said, and we now know what we didn't know 6 chapters ago. He said, as the Lord lives, he put a vow, he put an oath, he invoked God. He said, we will leave this to God. God will himself strike him down, or his time will come, or he'll die, or he'll go down to battle and perish. And we now know that's what happened. His time came, and he died, and he went down, and God struck him down. It all happened, as prophetically said. Okay, but God forbid, Chalila, Chas v'Chalila, God forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed, Mishloach Yadib Mashiach Hashem. Okay, so they take the chanit, the spear. They take also like a canteen of water, and then they go to the other side, and then they wake them up. They start yelling. It's the middle of the night from one hill to the other hill. There's no noise. You could hear crickets. She starts yelling, and David shouted to the troops, and to Avner, son of Ner. Vayikra David el Avner ben Ner. Hello to Avner. Avner, you have to answer for this. You're the chief of staff and entrusted to protect the anointed of God. And you were sleeping on the job. Vayan Avner, Vayomer Miata, Karatolim. Who are you? Who the heck are you, whoever you are, calling out to the king of Israel? And David said to Avner, you're a man, aren't you? And there's no one like you in Israel, right? So why didn't you keep watch over your Lord, the king? For one of our troops came to do violence to your Lord, the king. And you have not given a good account of yourself. Lo tova davar zeh asher asita, chai Hashem, kim b'nei mavet atem. He invokes God's, he's invoking, declaring like a biblical oath that Avner, you deserve to be killed, executed for this. Asher lo shmartem al adonechem al Mashiach Hashem. You did not guard your Lord, the anointed of God. And now take a look. Where is this? Where's your master's spear and his canteen that he has sleeping by his head when he goes to sleep? And Saul then intervenes in the conversation, hears the voice, recognizes David. You remember all of this maybe. So let's go back to where we are, chapter 2. So David now goes with Achinoam of Jezreel, and Yisrael is not the same as Yisrael. Those are different places. The valley of Jezreel is not the land of Israel. And Avigail, the wife of Naval, of Carmelite. So we already went through that. Okay. And then David took his 600 men, and he brought them all with his family. Remember how he went to war, and he got everybody back from the Amalekites, and they got back the wives and the kids, and everybody else's wives and kids. So they're all together. I don't know what, if a household is one man, one woman, 2, 3 kids, 600 times 5, I don't know, 3,000, 4,000 people. So David brought every man and his bayit, his household, his wife, his kids, and suddenly like 3,000 people just moved into Hebron. Mazel tov. Vayavo anshe Yehudah, vayimshechu sham et David lemelech Beit Yehudah. And the people of Yehudah, Judea, celebrated their new king. He's one of us. And that's the thing. It's an interesting kind of thing. In the United States, I often refer to American politics never to discuss politics qua politics for our Torah class, but because it helps bring examples that are as boldly alive as right now, and you see how it all works. In American politics, for example, there's actually a concept of favored son. What does that mean? It was always thought that a state of whom one of their residents becomes president of the United States is going to get all kinds of advantages. Since that president comes from that state, that president will see that they get more tax money, there'll be more tunnels built there, more bridges built there, more roadways will get paved. And there was always that kind of idea. And so it was actually known as a favored son candidate. Like, what's today? Today is Tuesday. I don't know what's going to happen. I think today's the South Carolina primary. So again, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but in a primary in South Carolina between Trump and Nikki Haley, so in a classic case, Nikki Haley would be called the favorite son. First of all, the paradox is she's a woman, so they'd have to rename her the favorite daughter. And then second of all, we'll only know after the vote is in whether she's their favorite daughter. But the idea always was, in fact, I'll bet you don't know this. It's in the Constitution that, as you know, the president is elected ultimately not by the popular vote, by the total number of votes, but by the electoral votes. And as you may not know, if both the president and vice presidential candidate are from the same state, then that state, its electoral votes go to the other side. And therefore, any presidential candidate has to think a million times over before suggesting a vice presidential candidate from his or her own state. Because let's say if Bill Clinton had picked somebody from Arkansas instead of Al Gore from neighboring Tennessee, he would have to forfeit those votes. And that might not be that serious a thing, but sometimes it could be a serious thing. Like let's say, just to use one example, I'm not advocating, but just let's say DeSantis had a more successful primary run than he ended up having, and he had become the candidate. And let's say the suggestion were made, take Senator Rick Scott, who's pretty powerful among the Republicans. It was always understood DeSantis would never be able to suggest Rick Scott as a vice presidential candidate, because then you'd have to give up all the Florida electoral votes, which would be a very big thing to give up. So being a favored son is a very big thing. And in biblical times, all the more so. If you are from the tribe of Judah, all of a sudden, all the power and base now is leaving Benjamin next door. It's only down the block. But all the power, all the taxes and all the spending and all the gallantry and frankly, your own access to the palace and getting to meet the king. Or if you need something done, it's always good if you know a guy who knows a guy. So until now, the people in Benjamin had a tremendous advantage. Forget about the other tribes. And now overnight, they're very celebratory. So now they're celebrating, and he's symbolic of everything else. He's moving the capital into Hebron, in the center of our territorial region. Okay. So first of all, everybody celebrates, and they anointed him. Mashiach, as I've taught you in the past, which is often transliterated correctly as Messiah, but it comes from anointed. The Mashiach, the ultimate Messiah, is the anointed one. And it comes from every king of Israel was anointed with holy oil. So David, already unknown to the public, had been anointed by the prophet Samuel. When God had taken away the kingdom and the monarchy from Shaul, but had not spelled out the details yet, and had sent Shmuel, prophet Samuel, secretly to anoint David. But now he's being publicly anointed and coronated. L'melech al Beit Yehudah, to be the king over the house of Judah. So wait a second. Is he the king of Israel? Is he the king of one tribe? Well, let's find out. In fact, by my asking the question, I already point to the idea that there's something going on here. Vayagidu leDavid lemor, Anshei Yavesh Gilad asher kavru et Shul. Before the story moves forward, there's a little, there's a little something that has to be, a knot that has to be tied up, a reward that has to be conferred. There's a thanks that are due. Do you remember how way back when, so I won't take much time on it, back in chapter 11 of 1 Samuel Shmuel Aleph, there was that evil Ammonite king, Nachash. And reminding you again, Ammon was here. So it was like next door. And Nachash had told them, I'm going to wipe you all out in Yavesh Gilad. And then he said, the only way I'm not going to basically exterminate all of you is if you all agree that my men will pluck out the eye of every single man here. Literally, you will line up and we will take out each man's eye. Or we'll kill all of you. And they asked for 3 days, and you may recall, and Saul came and saved them. And the loyalty that the people of Yavesh Gilad had for Saul for having defeated Nachash, the Ammonite, and having saved them, if you remember, it was he. It was right over here. Saul divided troops 3 columns, morning watch, they entered the camp, struck down the Ammonites until the day grew hot. Survivors scattered, no 2 were left together. And the people then said, and that was it. And the loyalty that they then felt for Saul was so extraordinary in light of what he had just done for them, that when everything came to an end and Saul died in battle against the Philistines, if you recall, the Philistines, when they found his body the next day after the battle, they beheaded his body, they decapitated him and his 3 sons. And then they, if you remember, they then took the bodies and they nailed them into the wall to publicly shame him. And when the inhabitants of Yavesh Gilad heard about it, Yoshvei Yavesh Gilad, Asher Asu Plishtim Shaul, what the Philistines had done to the corpse of Saul, and the humiliation and shame, and in the middle of the night, these stalwart men called Ish Chayil, men of valor, Kol Halayla, they went all night, they marched quietly to get Saul's body, and they took it down from the wall. We learned they burned it, which was an act of respect in the context. And nobody ever acknowledged that they had risked their lives just for the honor of Saul's body. So, Vayavo Anshe Yehudah, as they're celebrating King David now as our new king, Vayagidu David Limor, Anshe Yavesh Gilad Asher Kavruchel, we want you to know what the people of Yavesh Gilad did at personal life risk to honor the body and spare the shame to Saul. David sent messengers to the people, the Jews of Yavesh Gilad, and said, Beruchim atem Lashem, blessed, right? Baruch atah Hashem, Beruchim. By the way, Baruch, the word for blessing, a bracha, say a bracha, is from the Hebrew word for knee, K-N-E-E, berech, because you bend your knee to honor God. You bend your knee. So you recite a bracha by bending your berech. That's where that comes from. Baruchim atem Lashem, you are blessed to God. Asher asitem achesed hazeh im adonechem im Shaul, that you did this extraordinary chesed, kindness, not faithfulness. Faithfulness would be amunah. It's a bad translation. What can I tell you? Chesed is kindness. You do chesed. You did this extraordinary kindness to your Adon, your Lord, Master, Saul, and you buried the remains. He had to be, we went through why he had to be burned at that, in light of what had been done to him, but they gathered his remains, they buried it properly. The atah with an ayin, meaning yet and now. Ya'as Hashem imachem chesed v'emet. Just as you did to him kindness, and now you get to be truthful and faithful. May God do you kindness and faithful. And furthermore, וגם אנוכי אעשה איתכם הטובה הזאת, אשר עשיתם הדבר הזה. And I also, as the new king of Israel, in case you have any thoughts in the back of your mind that because Saul was always trying to kill me, maybe you think I don't like him, and maybe you did not get word of the Kinan, the dirge that I composed, and that I executed the man who killed him. In case you didn't get the memo, and you think I don't like Saul and I hate him, and therefore I'm going to take out some kind of an angry revenge against people who showed him kindness, let's clear the air right away. Just the opposite. Or as we say in yeshiva, pum fakert, just the opposite. I admire so much what you did for Saul. You, even though you're on the other side of the border, or the other side of the railroad tracks, you're in Benjamin land, you always will have special protection from me. May God protect you with kindness and truth, faithfulness. V'gam anochi, and I also will do, not just talking, I will do with you goodness. V'ata techazekne yadechem v'hiyu livnei chayil. Ki met adonechem Shaul. So be strong and be valorous. Yes, your Lord has died, King Saul. V'gam oti moshchu Beit Yehudah lemelech alehem. And I have been anointed now, what shall I tell you, to be the king on you, but you have a special ally in me. I admire and I'll be with you. And so as we wind down now, I want to bring out for you something else about David and the way he spoke. Back in Parshat Vayera, this is early on, chapter 14, Perek Yudalad, in Sefer Bereshit, there's the story about Abraham's nephew Lot. And you may recall, Abraham took care of Lot, and Lot was blessed because he was in Abraham's and Sarah's domestic care. Otherwise, he might not have been worthy of what he was blessed with. And among the things with which he was blessed, he had enormous wealth, which in those days expressed itself in cattle and sheep. And it got to the point that Lot's shepherds needed so much land for grazing for their sheep and cows. And Abraham had great amounts of sheep and cows. And so the two sets of shepherds got into arguments. And Abraham, he's not looking for fights. And Abraham said, you know what, Lot, it's a big country out there. You take whatever you want. You want the east, I'll take the west. You want the west, I'll take the east. And Lot took Sodom. And that's how that part of the story ended up later on. But before it got to the infamous or notorious fire and brimstone of Sodom, there had been a war, 5 kings against 4 kings. And the 4 kings was stronger than the 5 kings. One of the 5 losing countries in that war was Sodom. And Lot, as a resident of Sodom, was among those who was kidnapped during that war. Of course, his side was losing. He wasn't really fighting. He was just living there. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And he was taken a hostage. And refreshing your memory, Abraham went with, you remember, there was Avner, and there was Eshcol and Mamre. Remember his 3 friends we learned about a few weeks ago? Avner, Eshcol, and Mamre. And they went to war, and they saved Lot. They brought him back. In fact, they and their men and their army defeated the 4 kings who were stronger than the 5 kings. When the dust had settled, the 4 kings were defeated. Lot was rescued. The 5 defeated kings, now they were in charge. And then the winning kings and their religious leader, Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem, some believe that Shalem was the pre-Jerusalem name of Yerushalayim. Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem, the king of Shalem, which King James transliterates into Salem, and that's how you end up with Salem, North Carolina, making tobacco, making cigarettes. Winston-Salem and 2 cigarette companies that were big in the 60s. Whereas in the Middle East, they instead would have to walk a mile for a camel. Anyway, so Malki Tzedek, to refresh your memory, when they wanted to thank Abraham for having saved the 5 kings Forget about his own relative. They saved everybody. So he went and he greeted Abraham with lechem v'yayin. He was the Kohen Lekel Elyon. Malki Tzedek was the holiest man of his time. And this is the bracha he gives Abraham. Vayavarechehu vayomar. And he blessed him, bracha, vayomar, and he said, Baruch Avram Lekel Elyon, uBaruch Kel Elyon, asher migain sarecha b'yadecha. Blessed is Abram, to God Most High, and blessed is God Most High, who delivered you. You notice where I'm going with that as we close out now? Malki Tzedek, the holiest man of his time, blessed is Abraham, and blessed is God. And how does David HaMelech say it? David says, may you be blessed by God, and I will bless you. God comes first. That's how a Jew talks. And that's how a God-fearing person, whether Jewish, even non-Jewish, a God-fearing person, God comes first. May God bless you, and may I bless you. May, what a wonderful miracle. Baruch Hashem, what a miracle from God. And we have so many people to thank here. Like, let's just say like last week when the Israeli soldiers saved those two hostages from the Jews who had made Aliyah from Argentina. Talked a lot about that on Sundays last 2 weeks. So the way a Jew would respond to that is, what a miracle. Baruch Hashem, thank God, and thank the heroic fighters of the Shmuel Bet or the Amam or the Israeli army, or the thank God for the whatever. But first, thank God. And that's how we talk. I want to close tonight with the first. I'd mentioned I'm going to start closing with a different version each time of David Melech Yisrael. David Melech Yisrael, David, King of Israel, Chai v'Kayam. This is the original version that was. This is the original version that we all learned as kids in Jewish elementary school, in Yeshiva Katana, in nursery school, before Shlomo Carlebach wrote the more contemporary version that we'll learn in another week. But I want to start each week as we talk